What if MLK Junior was never assassinated and ran for president in 1968? Martin Luther King Jr. wins the Democratic Party nomination over Robert F. Kennedy, who was also assassinated in 1968 by Sirhan, Vice President Hubert Humphrey, and George Romney. Martin Luther King Jr. would pick Spock as his running mate. The Republicans would go with Richard Nixon and Spiro T. Agnew. But the independents would nominate Wallace and LeMay. Wallace isn't going to win anything but the deep southern states because he's racist for segregation. So he's only going to win like the deep southern states of Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, Louisiana, and Arkansas. Richard Nixon's campaign focuses on bringing all the troops home from Vietnam, while Martin Luther Jr.'s campaign focuses heavily on new technology and stopping segregation. 1978 U.S. election: King Jr. Spock vs. Nixon Agnew vs. Wallace LeMay. With no candidate reaching 270, the votes go down to Congress. The House selects Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Vice President Spock have a good presidential term, stopping segregation, aka segregation, which I said a couple minutes ago, and ending Washington colonialism. Martin Luther King Jr. wins Democratic renomination in 1922, but the Republicans go with Spiro Agnew, who focuses heavily on making a stronger America and a new culture. 1972 U.S. election: Agnew Reagan vs. King Jr. Spock. Martin Luther King Jr. wins re-election with 333 electoral votes, and this time the Democrats struggled to pass inflation. Martin Luther King Jr. would be criticized for raising taxes a bit, however. James Spock, the vice president to Martin Luther King Jr., would receive the 1980 Democratic nomination with Gary Hart. The Republicans would nominate Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush. Spock campaigns on continuing Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy, which isn't a smart idea, because the economy had failed, and King Jr. is sort of heavily criticized. 1980 U.S. election: Spock Hart vs. Reagan Bush. Ronald Reagan wins in a landslide with 378 electoral votes. The Democrats are sort of liked by MLK Jr., but James Spock lost in a landslide to Wilson Reagan. The Democrats would go with Henry Jackson, and Henry Jackson would pick Al Gore. 1984 U.S. election: Jackson Gore vs. Reagan Bush. Ronald Reagan wins re-election in 1988, winning every state except for Mississippi, Alabama, and D.C., and Minnesota, and Wyoming. Ronald Reagan has a good presidential term. Ronald Reagan's Vice President George H.W. Bush secures the Republican nomination in 1988 with Bob Dole as his running mate. 1988 U.S. election: Bush-Dole vs. Gore-Clinton. Al Gore wins 1988 U.S. election. Al Gore would have a good first presidential term, focusing on communists and the Soviet Union. America does get into a short war called the Islamic War, which starts in about probably 1990, but it quickly ends in December later 1990. In 1992, Al Gore fails to win re-nomination, and the Democrats nominate Joe Biden. Joe Biden would pick Hillary Clinton. 1992 U.S. election: Biden, H. Clinton versus door quail. Joe Biden wins in 1992. 1996 U.S. election. Biden H. Clinton versus W. Bush Cheney. Joe Biden wins re-election in 1996. During his second term, Biden would conflict with the Soviet Union and end Washington colonialism for the first time since MLK Junior in the 60s, as Washington colonialism came back up in 1972. But anyway, Joe Biden would continue on the legacy of MLK Junior. 2000 U.S. election. H. Clinton Dean versus Cheney Rumsfeld. Hillary Clinton, the vice president to Joe Biden, wins in a landslide. 9/11 does still happen, taking the lives of about 3,000 people, like in real life. The 2004 tsunami also happens. Osama bin Laden gets hunted down in 2003, with the Iraq War happening in 2003, a week later. In May 2002, the Democrats win the midterms. 2004 U.S. election. Clinton Dean vs. Rumsfeld Giuliani. Hillary Clinton wins re-election, continuing on Al Gore's legacy. The 2006 Hurricane Katrina does still happen, taking the lives of 167,000 people, the same as the 2004 tsunami. The 2008 recession would also happen, making a lot of bubbles crash and a lot of banks fail. 2008 U.S. election. Dean Obama vs. Palin Cheney. Howard Dean wins in a landslide in 2008. 2012 U.S. election. Dean Obama vs. Trump Vance. Howard Dean wins re-election in 2012. Continuing on MLK Junior's legacy. In his second term, Howard Dean has a fairly good presidential term. He lowered taxes, beef on military spending, and reducing regulation, and appointing Galvin Newsom and Jon Stewart to the Supreme Court. In 2016, the Democrats have Jon Stewart, Tim Kaine, and Barack Obama. Barack Obama would get the nominee with Jon Stewart. 2016 U.S. election. Obama Stewart vs. Pence Vance. Obama would win the election in a landslide of 368 electoral votes. The 2019 COVID pandemic would still happen, taking the lives of 100,000 people. 2020 U.S. election. Obama and Stewart vs. Kane Bush. Barack Obama easily wins re-election against John Kasich. The 2003, the Gaza War would break out. Obama would withdraw all the troops from Ukraine in 2024. And in 2023, withdraw all the troops from Afghanistan. And in 2022, the Democrats win the House and Senate. In 2024, the Republicans would nominate Jeb Bush, and he would nominate Marco Rubio. While the Democrats would nominate Vice President Jon Stewart, and Jon Stewart would nominate Kamala Harris. 2024 U.S. election, Stewart Harris vs. Bush Rubio. Jon Stewart wins 2024. 1978, MLK Junior. 72, MLK Junior. 1980, Ronald Reagan. 1984, Ronald Reagan. 1988, Al Gore. 1992, Joe Biden. 1996, Joe Biden. 2000, Hillary Clinton. 2004, Hillary Clinton. 2008, Hillary Clinton. 2008, Barack Obama. 2012, Barack Obama. 2016, Barack Obama. 2020, Barack Obama. 2024, John Stewart.